Hello all the crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like Wizards and Dragons and making games, and welcome back to Getting Started Making Games in GameMaker. So today, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about graphical things in GameMaker, and we're going to go and talk about drawing sprites. So, I suppose we should probably get the terminology out of the way first. When I say drawing sprites, I don't mean like going and like creating like... Why is there AI in MS Paint? I don't mean going and creating like a drawing application like MS Paint or whatever, like the GameMaker Sprite Editor or whatnot. No, I don't think I want to save that. In computer graphics, when someone says the word drawing, they are generally referring to the process of getting an image on the screen. And that is something that we have done so far in GameMaker. We've gotten graphics on the screen in a couple of different ways, such as going and creating various tile maps in the GameMaker Room Editor to let us like lay out background visuals for a level. You can also go and add sprite assets to the GameMaker room directly as an asset layer, and then of course you can go and assign sprites to an instance of a GameMaker object using things like the sprite index. You can squash and stretch it using the image scale variables and a couple of other things, but what we're going to do in this video is we are going to not use any of the automatic GameMaker sprite drawing behaviors. We are going to instead do all of this through code. And as far as I'm concerned, this is where the real fun begins in GameMaker. I may or may not have said that about a bunch of other things in GameMaker in this series so far, but we're going to have a lot of fun here. So, in this video, I will start by talking about some of the basic sprite drawing functions that GameMaker makes available to you. And later on in the video, I will be going and doing what I hope is a fun example of something that you can do with code such as this. And I will be doing a little bit of character customization. And by character customization, I don't mean I'm going to be like building an entire user interface for a character creator or anything like that. We're not going to be getting into user interface in GameMaker for probably a while in this series. But I will go and write a bit of code that is probably not too dissimilar to what you might want to write if you were to go and do something like this yourself. And we'll have a character that you can do things such as like going and dressing up with like a hat or whatever. By the way, I have gone for this example, and I have gone and zoomed in the camera on the player by quite a bit using the viewport camera, because I do want to be able to like focus the camera on our character like way zoomed in and not have it like zoomed out to show the entire room. So if you happen to be following along with this video and you're doing what I do and your character is like way tiny in the middle of the screen, that's probably why. Anyway, so let's get started by going and adding a draw event to our instance. So if you go right click in the event list and say add event, you can come down here to the various draw events. There's a bunch of different draw events. We're only going to be concerned with the first one. The main draw event is going to be the first one in this list. Draw GUI is for when you want to do user interface stuff, and all the ones after that in this list are more specific, specialized, advanced things that generally aren't really that important when you're just getting started. So the draw event is another event in GameMaker, which, like the step event, will run every frame, except while the step event will run exactly once every single frame with pretty much no exceptions, the draw event is a little bit more malleable than that. So for starters, the draw event will not run if this visible checkbox in the object properties is unchecked. So if an instance is set to invisible, the draw event will just be straight up skipped. And there's a couple of reasons you might want to do that, whether you want to actually have an invisible gameplay object which the player can't see, or whether you want to have an object which runs in the background and handles background tasks but doesn't have any visual representation. You might want to make it invisible for that. On the flip side, it's also possible to have the draw event run multiple times per frame, and that will happen if you have, for example, multiple viewports active in your game at once, because the draw event will run once for every active viewport in your game.
Hey.
So if you have like 4-player split screen, then the draw event for every instance will run once for every one of the 4 split screen windows in the game. For that reason, you generally want to avoid putting actual gameplay logic in the draw event. Things like checking for player position, player movement, checking for collisions, that kind of thing. Put that in the step event. Only put code related to the visuals in the draw event. And that's not a hard and fast rule. You can get away with not bothering to make the distinction between step and draw events, but it tends to be one of those things that if you don't keep your code organized in that way, it'll make your life a lot more harder later on. So, for starters, let me just go and run the game now with no code in this draw event, and you might see something that you might strike you as a little bit unusual, and that is the fact that our player character has disappeared. So our player character does still exist, and you can infer by the fact that the camera moves when I hit WASD that the character does still exist, and it is still running its step event, but it is now invisible. It does not have any visual representation on the screen, and that is because GameMaker, every GameMaker instance actually has a default draw event, and if you don't have a draw event, GameMaker will just run the default draw event, which essentially boils down to just drawing the sprite at the given sprite index, image X scale, Y scale, so on and so forth. But if you go and actually create a draw event yourself, that will get overridden. From this point on, for rendering your character, you're kind of on your own. And I say kind of because if you do want to invoke the default GameMaker draw event, you can use the draw self function. And the draw self function is just a line of code which will do basically what GameMaker will do by default. It will draw an object, sprite index, image X scale, Y scale, rotation, and it'll account for a couple of other sprite related instance variables. And you can see now if I run the game, we are back. We're behaving the same way that we were before. So that is draw self. It is an honorary mention. It is probably not one of the more interesting drawing functions that you can use, but I do think it's worth a shout out just before we move on to more interesting things. More interesting things include draw, and if you hit draw control space, you can see the drop down and all of the drawing related functions that GameMaker contains. There's quite a few of them. The one that we're going to be concerned with is going to be draw sprite. So, as part of GameMaker's default sprite drawing behavior, there are a couple of variables which come with every GameMaker instance which you can set and which will be used automatically when it comes to drawing sprites. And those are the image, the sprite index. We also have the image index. We have X, we have Y, we have image X scale, we have image Y scale, we have image angle, image blend, which I don't believe we've looked at yet, and image alpha, which I also don't believe we've looked at yet. These variables here highlighted in green are variables that come automatically with every instance of an object in GameMaker. And assigning values to them will have things happen automatically when you call either draw self, or if you just don't have a draw event and you let GameMaker run its default draw event for every object. On the one hand, this is pretty useful because it lets you just get something off the ground really quickly without having to write a lot of boring boilerplate code before you can even get an object on screen. But it also does kind of... It's sort of something that you have to unlearn in some ways when you stop using GameMaker's default drawing behaviors and when you start writing your own. So if you're not using the draw self function, or if you're not using GameMaker's default draw event, you can, for the most part, just use these as regular variables. But there are a couple things that you have to be careful of. X and Y, obviously, these represent the object's position in the room, the instance's position in the room. And they're used for a lot of things outside of drawing sprites, so I'm not really going to count them here. But image index and sprite index, these are... So GameMaker will by default animate your current sprite for you. Remember before when we were just walking around, our character was animating without us having to do anything to it. The frame of animation, the current frame of animation is stored in the image index variable, and it is increased. It is, how quickly the animation plays is based on both image speed. So you can use this to speed up or slow down or disable entirely the automatic animation. And also the character's FPS value in the sprite's FPS value, like this. And this is, again, often convenient if you just want to get something done quickly, but the fact that it does stuff behind the scenes can kind of make it a little bit more difficult to get a handle on what's going on if you're just learning. So I'm going to be using a couple of these in this video. I will try to address all the situations where they might cause problems by doing something that you don't expect. Anyway, the draw sprite function is a function which is going to take 4 arguments. One is going to be the sprite, one is going to be the subimage, which is just going to be the frame of animation, and then you have the X and the Y location that you want to draw the sprite at. So you can hard-code yourself a sprite index that you want to draw there. You can also hard-code a sprite subimage that you want to draw for the animation frame. Of course, you have the X and the Y, which I think for most character-related drawing, you want to be something related to the character's X and Y on screen. And now, if I run this, we are going to have the sprite drawn in front of us, but it's not going to animate. It's not going to flip horizontally when we move backwards and forwards. It's just going to be a static sprite, which is drawn at a position on screen. So, of course, if you don't want to hard-code a reference to a sprite or an image index that you want to draw, you can use, for example, an instance's current sprite index. I forgot where the letters on my keyboard are. And a character's current image index. And this will give us the current sprite that this character has set to its sprite index, and it will use image index for sprite animation. And if I do this, we have our little idle animation, we have our little walking animation. We still don't have flipping left or right because there's nothing in this code that tells it to do that. But that is that's still a step up from what we had a minute ago. So if you want a few more controls, so we are currently flipping our sprite when we draw it just by setting its image X scale to either 1 or -1 to flip it or not flip it over the horizontal axis. If you want to draw a sprite with some X and Y scaling, you can use a different function, which is going to be the draw sprite extended function. And the first 4 arguments in the draw sprite extended function are going to be the same as what we had before. So we have the sprite index, we have the image index, we have X, and we have Y. We've also got 5 more. I had to count them. So we have 2 arguments for image X scale and Y scale. So this can be 1 if you don't want scaling. This can be, for example, -1 if you want to flip the sprite on the X-axis but not on the Y-axis. This could be something like some larger number if you want to scale the sprite up. You can, of course, use the image X scale and image Y scale variables as your X scale and your Y scale. If you'd like, you don't have to. Feel free. I'm going to actually space these out, each on their own line, so that I don't have to have one line that's like monstrously long. Anyway, next we've got a rotation. So a rotation of 0 degrees is going to be like the default. You could say no rotation. You could set it to some other value if you want to rotate your sprite. This is going to be in degrees. Rotation is going to be in the counterclockwise direction. This is where the built-in variable image angle might or might not come in, if you'd like to use the built-in image angle. And lastly, we have color and alpha. So, somewhat counterintuitively, the default color, you might consider it, for no color blending is going to be white. That is because in GameMaker, and indeed often in computer graphics, a blending color of white, the blending color is going to be multiplied by the color of the sprite. And white is kind of the multiplicative identity for color. If you multiply any color by white, you just get that color. Whereas black is generally the like the 0 multiplication for color. If you multiply any color by black, you just get black. Anyway, color theory is a whole thing. If you don't want any color blending for your sprite when you call draw sprite extended, use C_white. And lastly, alpha for transparency. This is going to be a value between 0 and 1, where 0 is fully transparent, 1 is fully opaque. Depending on where you're coming from, you might be more used to transparency going from 0% to 100%, rather than from 0 to 1. But in computer graphics in general, and indeed in GameMaker, the convention typically is that transparency is just a multiplication factor, much like blending color, where 100% is just 1, 0% is 0, and anything in between 0 and 1 is going to be some fractional value. You can, of course, use the built-in variables image blend and image alpha for this if you like, or you don't have to. So now when I run the game, most of the parameters that we fed into the draw sprite extended function here aren't actually going to be doing anything, but we do have image X scale and Y scale, so we will now flip horizontally when you walk left and right like this, which is what we had when we started. This, by the way, is more or less just what draw self is. Like, when you call draw self, it's essentially a shorthand for this code. Now, if you want to have some fun with this, let's go and play with, for example, let's make the image Y scale like 2, and we can see what that'll do. That will stretch the sprite by a scale of 2 by a factor of 2 vertically. You'd think I would be old enough by now that I could tell my horizontal and my vertically apart from each other, but I do mix them up pretty often. If you wanted to apply some rotation, you could say apply a 90-degree rotation to your sprite, and will be rotated 90 degrees. Again, rotation in GameMaker is going to be counterclockwise, like the direction that my mouse cursor is going here. And it is going to be in degrees, although I think pretty much everybody is going to be okay with that because normal people don't use radians in everyday life. Image blend. So this is where things are going to get a little bit more fun to play around with. So white is going to be our default blending color, right? But if you wanted to blend your character with, for example, let's say C_red, there's a whole bunch of color constants built into GameMaker. And if you were to, let's use the online manual. If you were to go and open the manual page, you could see exactly what colors those constants are. I don't know why the manual lists the decimal value of each color instead of like the hex code, which I think would be infinitely more useful to most people. You can also insert a hex code. Red, for example, would be FF0000. There's also a couple of color-related functions that you can use to create a color value from red, green, and blue values, if you'd like. But let's just go with C_red, and this is going to tint our color red. Again, this is multiplicative. If you've ever played with like multiplicative blending in Photoshop or whatever. If you want something a little bit more, I'm gonna guess this is gonna look worse. But if you want, okay, that actually isn't bad. It's kind of like a bright green when you multiply bluish by yellow. Anyway, it's not a tint. It's not like a hue shift, or it's not a color replacement or anything. It is just a multiplicative color blend. But you can play around with that if you like. Default alpha, again, is going to be 1. If you want, for example, 50% transparency, you can insert 0.5 as your alpha value, and now our character is kind of like a ghost. Transparency gets a little bit more complicated when it comes to things like ordering and making sure that transparent sprites are drawn in the correct order and that they're not layered weirdly. But that might be a discussion for another day. Let's just go and set that back to what it was before. All right, there's a lot of changes in my undo buffer that I want to get back. And that is going to be draw sprite extended. So there are more sprite drawing functions in GameMaker, but they're going to start to get more specialized from here. So we also have draw sprite stretched. And this is, instead of specifying a scale, an X and a Y scale, draw sprite stretched is going to allow you to specify a width and a height that you want your sprite to fill. So you're kind of going to draw a rectangle and fill it with the texture of that sprite. So if I set, what is this guy's size anyway? It's going to be 32 by 32. So if I want the sprite to occupy instead of a 32 by 32 square, or some scale based on that, if I wanted it instead to occupy a square of, say, 100 by 100, I could use the draw sprite stretched function for that. And that'll do it. That is definitely a little bit weird. Okay, you're changing size on me a little bit when I transfer from the walking sprite to the idle sprite. This is not something you often want to do in for character drawing. This is something that you're probably more likely to want to do when it comes to drawing a user interface. If you want to stretch a sprite to fill a user interface, you might do something like this. It's also worth mentioning that the draw sprite and the draw sprite extended functions will respect the sprite origin. So this character, I've set the sprite origin to the bottom center so that it's more or less aligned with its feet. And when you draw a sprite in GameMaker, by default, it will draw relative to this position. So when I say draw sprite on this character, the X and the Y position is going to be here, where this little crosshairs is. But some of the more advanced sprite drawing functions, such as draw sprite stretched, they will not do that. They will always assume that the sprite origin is going to be in the upper left like this. And if you want to adjust the coordinates of your sprite to accommodate the sprite origin, you'll have to do a little bit of arithmetic yourself to figure out how to offset it. So moving on from draw sprite stretched, we've also got a couple of other sprite drawing functions. We've got, for example, draw sprite part. This is what you might use if you only want to draw a portion of a sprite and not the entire sprite. I don't know if I want to go into this right now, because this might lead us down a rabbit hole that might make the video pretty long. This is something you generally won't do for gameplay objects such as a character. This is something that probably you're going to more often want to do when it comes to drawing a user interface. Not to say you'll never want to do this to draw like a portion of a character sprite or something like that, but it's probably not one of the ones that you'll use more often. What else do we have? We've got draw sprite part and draw sprite part extended, which will also include color and blending information. We've got draw sprite tiled. This one is actually kind of fun. This will tile a sprite to fill the entire view. But you might be able to imagine what that looks like. So if I said draw sprite tiled, sprites index, image index, X and Y, you might be able to imagine what this is going to look like. And also, I think I saw, yeah, I think I accidentally, when I was dragging the sprite origin around, I didn't put it back. Let me fix that before I forget about it. All right, let's run this and see what draw sprite tile does. And this is going to tile the screen to be full of these night characters. You'll notice that when I go and switch to the running animation, it's going to tile differently, and that is because the sprite size for the running animation, and I don't remember if this was on purpose or if this was just like an accident or something. I don't remember if I was trying to demonstrate something, but the sprite size for the run animation is quite a bit bigger, and so when we switch to that sprite, instead of like just tiling this sprite, we're going to tile a much larger sprite. Admittedly, this isn't something that I think I really do very often, the draw sprite tiled function, but it is kind of fun in some cases. It's much more common when you want to tile an image in GameMaker that you'll want to do it to like something like a background in the room editor or something like that. And when you do that, you can, let me just hide all these. You can like set a sprite to the sprite in the background layer, and you can say tile horizontally, tile vertically, and that'll be all you need. I think I don't want to. Let's put that back the way it was. Anyway, draw sprite tiled is fun. You also have draw sprite tiled extended, of course, if you want to supply some additional color and alpha information to this function. And then, once we're done with all those, we've got draw sprite, where is it? Up here, draw sprite general. And this is kind of the granddaddy of all the sprite drawing functions. This is a function which will combine pretty much everything that we've looked at besides tiling information into a single function. So this will allow us to specify a portion of a sprite that you want to draw, the same way that draw sprite part would. It allows you to specify the image X scale and image Y scale, the same way that draw sprite extended would. It will let you specify a color for not only a blending color for not only the sprite in its entirety, but for each corner. So the top left, top right, bottom left, as well as the alpha. I kind of wish it would also allow you to specify an alpha for each corner, but I think this is already going pretty far. And if you want to do something like that, you're probably better off using like a shader or something.
Hey.
Alright, so that is all the sprite drawing functions that GameMaker contains. I did say that we would have some fun and do something that looks kind of sort of like character customization. So let me get rid of all that. We'll restart it from scratch in a minute. I have gone and added a couple new sprites to this project. This is a collection of duck-related sprites, and it's going to come in a couple of parts. So these are sprites from Wizarducks and the Lost Hat, which is one of the games that I like to work on when I'm not doing this YouTube stuff. That game is about a magic duck who wears a purple wizard hat, and I have gone and taken the different parts of the sprite that comprise that character and separated them into layers. And so we have, for example, the duck walking animation, and we've also got a walk cycle for the hat, which might go on top of the duck when you walk. We've also got the magic staff, which is wiggling around. It looks very, very funny to watch a disembodied magic staff just doing that. And lastly, we've got a portion of the wing which is to be drawn over the staff. And I think what we're going to spend the rest of today doing is building a little bit of character customization that allows us to turn layers of this sprite on or off when you and draw them all on the screen correctly when you walk around. So I'm going to start by going into the creative end, and I'm going to define a couple of new variables. I'm going to say has hat. We'll initialize that to, actually, let's initialize that to false. And has staff. We can also initialize that to false. Next, I'm going to want to go and just add a little bit of code in the player step event to turn those on or off. So I think I'll say if keyboard check, and what key do I want to check to turn the layers on or off? I think I'll say if keyboard check VK F1, then has hat equals true. We can say if keyboard check VK underscore F2 has hat equals false. I think I can also say use the F3 and the F4 keys, and this will set has staff to true and false, and that will allow us to toggle, that will allow us to toggle each of the layers here as appropriate. Next, I'm going to actually want a system for like drawing this. So I think I'm going to we'll treat SPR underscore duck still body as like the main sprite, and I'm gonna set this to the sprite index when we're not moving, and I'm gonna set SPR duck walk body to the sprite index when we are moving. And let me just go and delete the default draw event. I'll come back to that, and we can see what this is going to look like. Yes, let's restart the game. Now we have a duck who is going to walk around the very funny looking walk cycle, and he can turn around when you go left and right, but we don't have any of these extra layers visible yet. So now, because I want different sprites when you're walking and when you're still, for the hat, the staff, and the wing that goes over the staff, I'm going to go into the create event, and I'm going to create a couple more variables which are going to more or less mirror the sprite index, and I'm going to call them sprites index hat equals SPR duck still hat. We can say sprites index staff equals SPR duck still staff, and sprite index staff wing equals SPR duck still staff wing, like this. These variables are of my own invention. They are not going to be highlighted in green. However, we can go and set them. So sprite index hat when you're walking is going to be SPR duck walk hat. Sprite index staff is going to be equal to duck walk staff. Sprite index staff wing is going to be SPR duck walk staff wing, like this. I'm just going to copy this when we go and set our sprite index when you're walking, and when you're still, we can change those sprites to SPR duck still hat, and also the other ones, like that. And now I can go into the draw event. I can go back, and let's go back to saying draw sprite extended sprite index image index x y image x scale image y scale. I'm just gonna ignore the rotation. I'm not gonna use the instance variables for those because I'm too lazy to type them out because they won't be used. All right, so now let's get to the rest of this. So to draw the rest of the layers, I can do, for example, let's start with the hat because that's just one sprite. I can say if has hat. We can go and we can do something very similar to this, and we can say draw sprite extended, but instead of using our sprite index and doing basically the same thing twice, I'm going to use the sprite index hat variable that I set up, which is going to store a reference to the hat sprite that we are currently using. And now if I run the game, and if I hit, what was it, F1, we can put our hat on, and if I hit 2, we can take our hat off, and indeed this in some worlds passes as character customization. Alright, that's fun. By the way, all of these sprites, all of these duck sprites, they are, like, they were drawn to the same proportions, obviously, and they're all the same size. They all have the sprite index in the same place. I mean, the sprite origin in the same place. If you were to go and take these sprites and layer them on top of each other in something like Photoshop, you would see something like what we saw in-game right there. So we're not going to have to, like, align different articles of clothing to different locations on the sprite. They were just drawn that way to begin with, which is generally how you would want to do things when you do a character creator. Not universally if you've got a lot of like dynamic content, but makes your life easier if you set up your sprites that way. Also, obviously, all the frames of sprite animation are synced with each other, so like, for example, sprite image frame number 5 of the hat corresponds to sprite image frame number 5 of the body. So when I actually go to draw all the sprites, as long as they use the same image index, then they should all come out synchronized with each other. Anyway, next we're also going to be handling the staff, and for that, you don't have to do the equals true here. I sometimes do that in these videos just because it comes out, I come out typing it the way that I speak it. But if a true or false condition is just like, this will implicitly check if this variable contains true, or at least a value that is truthy. Anyway, I'm gonna go and copy this again, and we can say draw sprite extended instead of sprite index hat. We can say sprite index staff. This is going to need to be layered slightly differently, because if I go and turn the staff on, it's going to be drawn over my beak, and it's going to look like it's glued to my beak, which is definitely a little on the weird side. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw this before our main, like, duck sprite, our main body sprite, and that is going to cause it to be drawn behind us, which is definitely better. It still looks like it's glued to our beak, but that's what the sprite index staff wing sprite is for. And now if I turn this on, we can see it actually looks like I'm holding it. Alright, much better. We can turn on our hat, we can turn on our staff, we can turn either of them on or off. Good fun. So that is but a small example of some of the things that you can do with sprite drawing. There's obviously no shortage of things that you can do with the sprite drawing functions, but I thought that was one that would that people would enjoy. So about this, like, sprite index setting here, this is a little bit messy. This is a lot of that, like, copied and pasted code thing that is generally will make things difficult if you have a lot of it. There are other ways that you could architect this to cut down on the code duplication like that. I do want to make, like, I don't know if I would call them style guide videos about GameMaker, but I do want to make videos on things that you can do to prevent yourself from shooting yourself in the foot later. That might address things sort of like this, data management, that kind of thing. But that's going to be a subject for some video much farther on down the road. Until then, my name is Michael. I like Wizards and Dragons and making games. I do like to make videos about all kinds of stuff that you can do in GameMaker, so if anything like this appeals to you, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places. You should all go check out Wizarducks and the Lost Hat, which is one of the games that I like to work on when I'm not doing YouTube stuff. Link to the Steam page can be found down below. I hope you all found that useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, Zach Robinson, Squareco, Spide Games, Pixelated Pope, Paradox, Nykotic, Manta Ray, GameMaker, GameArt Indie, Edward Holt, DJ Gibbles, Brenton, Bokeh Dev, and Argo the Knot for supporting these videos. If you want to join the ranks of these very cool people, head on down to the Patreon page in the video description to join the fun.